My name is Ramona, 34 years old, standing in what used to be our living room, watching my father-in-law, Harold, rifling through my husband's belongings just 3 days after we buried him. The words he spoke next felt like ice water in my veins. "This all reverts to blood family now," he said, not even looking at me. 12 years of marriage, of building a life together, and suddenly I was nothing more than a stranger in my own home. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and please subscribe if you believe widows deserve justice too. I first met Marcus at an art exhibition in downtown Hartford 7 years ago. I was there showcasing my graphic design portfolio, hoping to network with potential clients. Marcus wandered into the gallery during his lunch break, still wearing his software engineer badge from the tech company 3 blocks away. He stopped at my digital installation piece, a moving visualization of Connecticut's seasons, and stood there for 15 minutes, just watching it cycle through spring to winter. When he finally spoke to me, his first words were about how the code behind it must be elegant. Most people commented on the colors or the emotion, but Marcus saw the structure, the logic that made beauty possible. Our first real conversation lasted 3 hours. The gallery was supposed to close at 6, but we kept talking on the sidewalk outside, then at a coffee shop, then walking through Bushnell Park as the sun set. Marcus had this way of listening that made you feel like your words were the most important thing in the world. He asked about my creative process, my inspiration, my dreams of running my own design studio someday. I learned he was 32, 2 years older than me, originally from West Hartford, and had been coding since he was 12 when his dad bought him his first computer. The contrast between Marcus and his family became apparent from our very first dinner with them. Harold worked in real estate development, owned several commercial properties across Connecticut, and never missed an opportunity to mention his family legacy. Dorothy. His mother had been a socialite before marriage, still maintaining her connections through various charity boards and country clubs. They lived in a massive colonial house in Farmington, the kind with pillars and a circular driveway that screamed old money, even though Harold had built his wealth in the 80s boom. That first dinner, Dorothy looked at my portfolio on my phone with a polite smile that never reached her eyes. "How interesting," she said, "that you can make a living from computer drawings." Harold was more direct, asking if I planned to get a real job once Marcus and I got serious. Marcus squeezed my hand under the table and changed the subject to his latest project at work. I should have recognized the warning signs then, but I was in love and believed that time would soften their edges. Our wedding 2 years later was smaller than I had dreamed as a little girl. Harold insisted that lavish weddings were wasteful, that smart people invested in their future instead of one party. Dorothy complained that none of her society friends would understand such a modest affair. We settled on 60 guests at a historic inn in Glastonbury, with my college roommate as my maid of honor and Marcus's childhood friend as best man. My parents flew in from Seattle, where they had retired, and I could see my mother's confusion at the cold reception from Marcus's family. During the father-son dance that Harold had insisted on, I heard him tell Marcus to remember that marriage was just paper, but family was blood. Despite the rocky start with his parents, Marcus and I built something beautiful together. We found a 1950s ranch house in Glastonbury with original hardwood floors and a huge backyard that backed up to conservation land. The house needed work, but it had good bones, as the inspector said. What Harold never knew was that I put down 60% of the down payment, using the inheritance from my grandmother, a woman who had run her own business in the 40s when women rarely did such things. She would have loved Marcus and his quiet strength. We spent weekends transforming that house into our home. Marcus learned plumbing from YouTube videos to install a new bathroom. I taught myself tile work to create a backsplash in the kitchen inspired by Portuguese azulejos. Every improvement we made was a conversation between us, a choice we made together. The previous owners had used the garage as storage, but we converted it into a studio space for my work, with north-facing windows. We installed ourselves and built-in desks Marcus designed and constructed. My freelance business grew steadily. I specialized in branding for small businesses, particularly women-owned startups, and built a reputation for creating visual identities that told authentic stories. Marcus would often work from home on Fridays, setting up his laptop in my studio coding while I designed. We had this comfortable rhythm, this synchronized dance of creativity and logic sharing space. Sometimes I would look up from my tablet to find him watching me work, this soft smile on his face like he couldn't believe his luck. Marcus thrived at his company too. Within 3 years, he moved from senior developer to team lead, then to principal engineer. His specialty was creating elegant solutions to complex problems, writing code that other developers described as poetry. His salary increased substantially, and we started serious conversations about our financial future. We met with a financial advisor, set up retirement accounts, and most importantly, created our wills with an estate planning attorney in Hartford, someone Marcus found through a colleague specifically not using Harold's connections. The pressure about children started at every family gathering. Harold would make comments about carrying on the family name, about his legacy needing heirs. Dorothy would pointedly discuss her friends' grandchildren, showing photos on her phone of babies I had never met and would never meet. Jennifer, Marcus's younger sister, had married right out of college to a man Harold approved of, someone in commercial real estate like himself. She had 3 children in 4 years and never missed an opportunity to tell me how fulfilled motherhood made her usually, while her husband ignored the chaos, and Harold praised him for providing so well. Marcus and I had decided to wait on children. We wanted to be financially secure, wanted to travel, wanted to establish our careers. The truth was more complex, though. Marcus worried about bringing children into his family dynamic, about Harold's influence, about Dorothy's criticism. He wanted to be sure we were strong enough as a couple to shield any future children from the toxicity he had grown up with. I agreed, though. Part of me wondered if we were just postponing an inevitable confrontation. The financial pressure intensified when Harold started pushing Marcus to invest in his new development project, a strip mall in Manchester, that Harold claimed would triple any investment. Marcus researched it thoroughly, even hired an independent analyst to review the proposal. The numbers didn't add up, the location was declining, and the anchor tenant Harold promised was already in negotiations with another property. When Marcus declined, Harold accused me of poisoning his son, against family of being a gold digger who wanted to keep Marcus's money for myself. That confrontation happened at Thanksgiving 3 years ago. Harold had been drinking bourbon since noon, and by the time we sat down to dinner, his face was flushed and his words sharp. He stood up during Dorothy's perfectly prepared meal and announced that family took care of family, that blood was thicker than water, and that some people understood loyalty, while others only understood selfishness. He looked directly at me during that last part. Marcus stood up too, told his father that insulting his wife meant insulting him, and we left before the pie was served. The relationship never recovered. We started skipping family events, making excuses about work obligations or prior commitments. Jennifer would text Marcus trying to guilt him about abandoning family, about breaking their mother's heart. She would mention needing loans for her children's private school, for home renovations, for vacation properties. Marcus helped once, lending her $10,000 for what she claimed was an emergency medical expense. 6 months later, we saw Facebook photos of their Disney cruise and realized we would never see that money again. Christmas 2 years ago was the last time we all gathered. Dorothy had insisted calling Marcus daily for weeks, crying about family traditions and how she might not have many Christmases left, despite being in perfect health at 68. We agreed to attend dinner, but not stay overnight. The evening started with Harold's passive-aggressive toast about family members who knew their priorities and those who had forgotten where they came from. Jennifer's husband made jokes about Marcus being whipped, while Jennifer herself kept mentioning how hard it was to maintain their lifestyle on just her husband's income, looking pointedly at Marcus. The breaking point came when Harold pulled Marcus into his study after dinner. I could hear raised voices through the door, Harold shouting about ungrateful sons, and Marcus responding with unusual anger. When Marcus emerged, his face was pale and his hands were shaking. In the car, he told me Harold had threatened to cut him out of the will entirely if he didn't start showing proper family loyalty, which apparently meant divorcing me and investing in the family business. Marcus laughed bitterly and said there was nothing to cut him out of that he wanted anyway. That night, driving home through light snow, Marcus made me promise something. If anything ever happened to him, he said I should fight for what was ours. He said his father would try to take everything, would use family as a weapon, but that we had built our life together and no one could erase that. I told him to stop being morbid, that nothing would happen, that we had decades ahead of us. He squeezed my hand and made me promise anyway. I did, thinking it was just his way of processing the evening's trauma. 2 months later, Marcus scheduled another meeting with our estate attorney. He updated everything, made sure my name was on every account as joint owner with rights of survivorship, confirmed the beneficiaries on his life insurance, and even created a document detailing all our assets and where to find important papers. He also did something he didn't tell me about until much later, something that would prove crucial. He started recording certain conversations with his father, legal in Connecticut, as long as one party consents, because Harold had started making threats he wanted documented. Life returned to a peaceful rhythm after that Christmas. Marcus and I focused on our work, our home, our marriage. We took a vacation to Portugal, finally seeing those tiles that had inspired our kitchen in their original settings. We hiked in Sintra, ate custard tarts in Lisbon, and watched sunsets from cliff tops in Lagos. Marcus seemed lighter away from his family, laughing more freely, sleeping better. We talked about maybe moving further away, perhaps to California, where my cousin lived somewhere Harold's shadow couldn't reach. I expanded my client base, taking on bigger projects, even hiring a part-time assistant to help with administrative work. Marcus's team at work was developing something revolutionary in data encryption, and he would come home excited about breakthroughs, trying to explain complex algorithms while I cooked dinner. We had date nights every Friday, trying new restaurants in Hartford, attending concerts at the Bushnell, or sometimes just walking through Elizabeth Park, talking about everything and nothing. The last normal day was a Thursday in March. Marcus had left early for a breakfast meeting with potential investors interested in his team's project. He texted me a heart emoji from the office around noon, our simple way of saying we were thinking of each other. I sent one back along with a photo of a logo design I was particularly proud of. He responded with fire emojis and said we should celebrate that weekend. I suggested we drive to the Berkshires, maybe stay at that bed and breakfast we loved in Lenox. He agreed and said he would make reservations when he got home. At 6:30, he texted that he was leaving the office, stopping at Whole Foods to grab ingredients for dinner. He wanted to make his special pasta dish, the one he had perfected during lockdown, with homemade sauce and fresh herbs from our garden that had somehow survived the winter. I was finishing up a project in my studio, told him I would open a bottle of that Malbec we had been saving. He sent another heart emoji. That was our last conversation. The call came at 7:43. I remember the exact time, because I had just looked at my phone, wondering why Marcus was taking so long at the store. The caller ID showed Hartford Hospital, and my first thought was that Marcus had witnessed an accident, was maybe helping someone, because that was the kind of person he was. The voice on the other end was professionally gentle, asking if I was Ramona Williams, asking if I could come to the hospital immediately, saying there had been an accident. The drive to the hospital was surreal. I ran red lights, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, calling Marcus's phone over and over, hearing it go straight to voicemail. At the emergency entrance, I abandoned my car in a no parking zone and ran inside. The receptionist's face changed when I said my name, and she immediately called someone to escort me to a family room. A small space with uncomfortable chairs and a box of tissues on every surface, a room designed for the worst news. The doctor was young, probably a resident, and his voice cracked when he explained. A drunk driver had run a red light on Route 84, hitting Marcus's car at full speed on the driver's side. Marcus had been conscious when the paramedics arrived, had even told them to call me, but his injuries were too severe. Internal bleeding they couldn't stop fast enough. They had tried everything. He passed away at 7:30, 12 minutes before they called me. While I was choosing wine and planning our weekend, my husband died alone in a trauma bay, asking for me. They let me see him. Some people say you shouldn't, that it's better to remember them alive, but I needed to see him. Needed to know it was real. He looked peaceful, which everyone says, but I hadn't believed until that moment. There was a cut on his forehead, some bruising, but other when he looked like he was sleeping. I held his hand still warm and told him about the logo I had designed, about the wine waiting at home, about how I loved him and would always love him. A nurse stood quietly in the corner, letting me have my time, occasionally handing me tissues. The practical matters came crashing in immediately. Forms to sign, belongings to collect, decisions about funeral homes. Marcus's phone was cracked but functioning, and I used his thumb to unlock it. Feeling sick about the violation but needing to call his parents. Harold answered on the second ring, his voice annoyed at the late call. When I told him there was silence, then a strange sound I couldn't identify. Then Dorothy screaming in the background. Harold said they would handle everything and hung up. By the time I got home at nearly midnight, Harold had already called the funeral home. Already made arrangements, already posted on Facebook about the tragic loss of his beloved son. My phone had dozens of messages, but none from Harold or Dorothy checking on me. Jennifer texted asking about life insurance policies. Marcus's childhood friend called crying, saying he couldn't believe it. My parents booked flights from Seattle immediately. But in that house, our home, I was alone with the pasta ingredients still in grocery bags by the door where the police had left them after recovering them from Marcus's car. The funeral was a blur of Harold's control and my grief. He chose everything without consulting me, from the casket, to the flowers, to the music. When I suggested including Marcus's favorite song, Harold said it wasn't appropriate for a formal service. When I wrote a eulogy about our life together, Dorothy informed me that Harold would be doing the main speech, and I could say something brief if I wanted. At the service, Harold spoke for 20 minutes about Marcus's childhood, his achievements, his family legacy, mentioning me exactly once as his son's wife, not even using my name. The receiving line was torture. Harold's business associates treating me like staff. Dorothy's society friends whispering about how young I was to be a widow, Jennifer hugging me while asking if Marcus had left any special provisions for his nieces and nephews. My parents flanked me protectively, but they were outsiders here, their Seattle casual clothes marking them as different from the Connecticut establishment Harold commanded. Only Sarah, Marcus's former colleague, who had moved to Boston, seemed to see me as a person rather than an inconvenience or opportunity. The burial was private family only, which Harold defined as blood relatives plus spouses. He had chosen a plot in the family section of an old cemetery in Farmington, with a headstone, already engraved with just Marcus's name, and dates, no mention of beloved husband or any acknowledgement of our marriage. When I placed a rose on the casket, Harold actually checked his watch, impatient with my grief. As the casket lowered, Dorothy stood between me and the grave, as if protecting her son from me, even in death. Back at our house, Harold had insisted on a gathering, though I had begged for privacy. He brought his brother Robert, who I learned was also his lawyer, and Jennifer came with her husband and a notebook. While guests ate catered food in my living room, Harold walked through the house like he owned it, opening closets, examining electronics, actually taking photos of Marcus's home office. When I asked what he was doing, he said he was cataloguing his son's assets for the estate. The guests left within an hour, sensing the tension. My parents wanted to stay, but I sent them to their hotel, needing space to process. As soon as the last guest departed, Harold asked everyone except Robert to leave the room. Then he stood in my living room, the room where Marcus and I had watched movies and planned our future, and delivered his announcement. This house, these assets. Everything Marcus had reverts to blood family now. That's how inheritance works when there's no will, and my son was too young to have worried about such things. I told him Marcus had a will that we both did, that everything was legally documented. Harold actually laughed, said Marcus would never have done something so formal without consulting him, that I was obviously confused in my grief. Robert pulled out papers showing Massachusetts intestacy laws, which weren't even applicable since we lived in Connecticut. When I insisted I had documents, Harold said I had 30 days to produce them or vacate the property, and that he would be freezing Marcus's accounts in the meantime to prevent any unauthorized withdrawals. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. 3 days after burying my husband, his family was trying to make me homeless. Harold had already contacted the banks, claiming as next of kin that he needed to protect his son's assets. Our joint checking account was frozen, credit cards cancelled. Even Marcus's individual investment account was somehow restricted. I had my personal business account with about $8,000, and suddenly that was all I had access to in the world. The mortgage payment was due in 2 weeks, utilities needed to be paid, and I was effectively locked out of my own financial life. Dorothy started visiting daily, always with an excuse. She needed to collect something of Marcus's. She wanted to look through photo albums. She was measuring rooms for furniture she claimed belonged to the family. Each visit was an invasion, her critical eyes cataloguing everything, her comments designed to wound. She mentioned how the house was too big for one person anyway, how I would be happier in a small apartment, how it was selfish to keep a family home when I had no family. She never acknowledged that Marcus had been my family, that we had been planning children, that this house held our dreams. Jennifer was worse in her false sympathy. She would arrive with coffee and concerned expressions, then casually mention how hard it was to maintain her children's lifestyle, how Marcus would have wanted his nieces and nephews, provided for how life insurance was really meant for blood family. She actually brought her oldest child, once a 10-year-old, who asked if she could have Uncle Marcus's gaming system since he didn't need it anymore. Jennifer didn't correct her, just smiled and said we would see what Uncle Marcus would have wanted. The first lawyer I contacted was recommended by a friend. He listened to my story, looked at the names involved, and declined the case. Harold Williams was too connected. He said too powerful in local real estate and politics. The second lawyer wanted a $20,000 retainer, said it would be a long fight, and couldn't guarantee success even with proper documentation. The third was honest enough to say that Harold had already been calling law firms, warning them about his unstable daughter-in-law trying to steal his son's estate. My reputation was being destroyed before I could even fight back. Sleep became impossible. I would wake up expecting to find Marcus beside me, reaching for him in the dark, then remembering with fresh pain. I stopped eating real meals, surviving on coffee and crackers. The house felt wrong without him, too quiet, too empty. But it was all I had left of our life together. I spent hours in his office, sitting in his chair, wearing his hoodies that still smelled like him, trying to feel less alone. His computer sat there, password protected, and I didn't know how to access it. Didn't know if there was something there that could help me. Harold escalated his tactics. He hired a moving company to provide an estimate, having them come to the house while I was there, walking through our bedroom, discussing how to pack fragile items. He filed paperwork with the probate court, claiming to be the administrator of Marcus's estate, using Robert's law firm to make it official. He sent formal notices, demanding I provide an inventory of all household items, claiming he needed to protect his son's assets from disposal. The psychological warfare was relentless, designed to break me down, to make me give up and disappear. 10 days after the funeral, rock bottom felt generous for where I was. The moving company had left boxes on my porch with a note about being available whenever I was ready. The latest legal notice demanded I appear in court to contest Harold's claim to the estate, but I couldn't afford a lawyer to represent me. Dorothy had somehow gotten a key and let herself in while I was at the grocery store rearranging items and leaving a note about preparing the house for its rightful owners. Even the neighbors had started avoiding me, clearly influenced by whatever Harold was telling people at the country club. That night, I seriously considered just leaving, packing what I could fit in my car and driving back to Seattle, starting over, letting Harold have his victory. I sat in Marcus's office, writing a goodbye letter to him, apologizing for not being strong enough to fight for failing to keep my promise. I was addressing an envelope to leave with Sarah, asking her to place it at his grave, when the doorbell rang at nearly 10 at night. Sarah stood on my porch with a bottle of wine and a determined expression. She had driven down from Boston after work because something had been bothering her about the funeral, about Harold's behavior, about things Marcus had said over the years. We sat in my kitchen, the wine untouched, as she told me about conversations with Marcus, about his concerns, about his family, about precautions he had mentioned taking. Then she said something that changed everything. Marcus had told her about a lawyer, someone specific he trusted, someone Harold didn't know about. Catherine Walsh worked out of a small office in New Haven, specializing in estate law, and particularly in cases involving family disputes and contested inheritances. Sarah had called her, already explained the situation, and Catherine had agreed to meet with me immediately. The next morning, I drove to New Haven with every document I could find, a box of papers that might mean nothing or everything. Catherine was in her 50s, with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor that made me feel less crazy for the first time in days. She reviewed everything methodically, asking pointed questions, taking notes in precise handwriting. When I mentioned the frozen accounts, she made a phone call, immediately speaking in legal terms I didn't understand, but that sounded serious. When I told her about Harold's connections and the threats, she actually smiled and said she had been hoping to face off against Robert's firm for years. She agreed to take the case pro bono initially, with payment from the estate once we won, and she used when, not if. The first breakthrough came when Catherine discovered that Harold had been filing paperwork in the wrong jurisdiction, apparently hoping I wouldn't notice. Connecticut law was very different from what Robert had been claiming. And more importantly, Catherine found the original will filing that Marcus had done through our estate attorney. It was properly witnessed, notarized, and filed with the state. Everything was left to me explicitly, with detailed provisions that seemed almost prescient about challenges from his family. Catherine then uncovered something Harold hadn't expected. The deed to our house listed me as the primary owner, holding 70%, because of my larger down payment from my grandmother's inheritance. Marcus owned 30%, which would transfer to me regardless. Harold's claim to the house was completely baseless, but he had been counting on me not knowing this, or being too overwhelmed to discover it. The mortgage company confirmed I was the primary borrower, Marcus was secondary. Another detail that undermined Harold's entire case. The life insurance investigation revealed more. Marcus had purchased a policy through his work and a separate private policy, both with me as sole beneficiary. Harold had tried to claim that as next of kin, he should be the rightful beneficiary. But the insurance companies had clear documentations with my name, social security number, and Marcus's explicit signature. The policies totaled $800,000, money Harold had probably already spent in his mind. But the most shocking discovery came from Marcus's computer. Catherine had obtained a court order to access it for estate purposes, and I finally knew his password, our wedding date combined with my grandmother's name, something I should have guessed. In his documents folder was a file labeled insurance, but it contained more than financial records. It held recordings, emails, and a letter to me that Marcus had updated just a month before his death. The recordings were legal and devastating. Harold, talking about how blood family always wins in the end, how wives were temporary but sons were forever, how he had ways to ensure family money stayed in the family. One recording from January captured Harold threatening to destroy me financially if Marcus died before him, saying he had done it before with a business partner's widow. Marcus had also saved emails where Harold discussed hiding assets from the IRS, moving money through shell companies, and avoiding taxes through fraudulent charitable donations. The letter to me was dated February 10th, 6 weeks before the accident. Marcus wrote about his love for me, our life together, and his fears about his family. He detailed every asset we owned, where to find documents, which lawyers to trust, and specifically warned about Harold's tactics. He wrote that if anything happened to him, Harold would try to take. Everything would use family as a weapon, would try to break me down. He asked me to be strong, to fight, to not let his father erase our marriage. The last line read, "You are my family, my only family, and everything I have is yours, because everything I am is yours." Catherine moved with strategic precision once we had our evidence assembled. Instead of just defending against Harold's claims, she filed a countersuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress, fraud, and attempted theft. She submitted the recordings to the probate court, along with evidence of Harold filing false documents and freezing accounts he had no authority to touch. She also sent copies to the FBI regarding the tax evasion discussions, though that was a separate matter that would unfold later. The court hearing was scheduled for April 15th, 5 weeks after Marcus's death. Catherine had managed to get an expedited hearing due to the financial hardship of the frozen accounts. Harold arrived with a team of 3 lawyers from prestigious Hartford firms, clearly expecting to overwhelm us. Dorothy sat in the front row with Jennifer, both dressed in black, as if still in mourning, playing the part of the grieving family. I sat beside Catherine, wearing the suit I had worn to job interviews, trying to look stable and competent rather than shattered. Harold's team went first, presenting their case that Marcus had been unduly influenced by me, that family assets were being misappropriated, that Connecticut tradition supported family inheritance. They actually used the phrase blood family 17 times in their opening statement, as Catherine quietly kept count on her legal pad. They painted me as a gold digger who had isolated Marcus from his loving family, who was now trying to profit from his death. Robert himself testified about Marcus's supposed intentions to invest in family businesses, implying promises that were never made. When Catherine rose to present our case, she started quietly, almost conversationally. She introduced the will first, the properly executed legal document that should have ended everything immediately. Harold's lawyers tried to question its authenticity, suggesting it might have been forged or signed under duress. Catherine then played the first recording, Harold's voice filling the courtroom, talking about ensuring family money stayed in the family no matter what legal documents said. The judge's expression changed immediately. She presented evidence methodically, each piece building on the last. The deed showing my majority ownership of the house, the bank records showing my grandmother's inheritance as the down payment, the life insurance policies with my name clearly designated. Email after email of Harold discussing his intentions to take everything if something happened to Marcus. Then she played the recording from January, Harold's threat about destroying me like he had destroyed another widow. Dorothy actually gasped, apparently unaware of that conversation. The judge stopped the proceedings twice, once to censure Robert for clear ethical violations in representing his brother while filing false documents with the court, and once to warn Harold about potential criminal charges for fraud and harassment. When Catherine introduced evidence of Harold accessing Marcus's accounts after his death, without authority moving money to his own holdings, the judge ordered an immediate freeze on Harold's assets, pending investigation. Harold's expensive lawyers started distancing themselves, whispering urgently about withdrawing from the case. Catherine's closing argument was devastating in its simplicity. She read Marcus's letter to me, his words about our love, our life, his fears about his family. She showed photos of us renovating our house, building our life, creating our family of two. She contrasted that with Harold's words on the recordings, his admitted plans to steal from his son's widow, his belief that legal documents meant nothing compared to blood. She asked the judge to consider what kind of man Marcus was choosing to protect his wife, even in death, and what kind of man Harold was trying to profit from his son's tragedy. The judge's ruling was immediate and comprehensive. Every claim Harold had made was dismissed with prejudice. The will was upheld completely. All frozen accounts were to be released immediately with penalties for unlawful restriction. Harold was ordered to pay all my legal fees plus damages for emotional distress, a sum that would eventually total $300,000. Most surprisingly, the judge issued a restraining order preventing Harold, Dorothy, or Jennifer from coming within 500 feet of me or my property. Harold erupted in the courtroom, shouting about corruption, about family rights, about how this wasn't over. The judge threatened him with contempt, and his own lawyers physically restrained him from approaching the bench. Dorothy was crying, but not from grief, from rage that their plan had failed. Jennifer tried to approach me in the hallway afterward, saying something about Marcus wanting family to be together. But Catherine stepped between us and reminded her about the restraining order that would take effect immediately. The aftermath was swift and severe for Harold's family. The FBI investigation into tax evasion triggered by the evidence Catherine had submitted resulted in Harold's real estate empire being audited going back a decade. Multiple properties were seized, accounts frozen, and Harold eventually plea bargained to avoid prison, paying millions in back taxes and penalties. His reputation in Connecticut business circles was destroyed. His country club membership revoked, his social standing eliminated. Dorothy filed for divorce within 6 months, taking what little remained and moving to Florida to live with her sister. Jennifer's husband divorced her when he discovered she had been having an affair with one of Harold's business partners, information that came out during the FBI investigation. She tried to contest the divorce, but her husband had evidence of her taking money from Marcus's estate before his death, forging his signature on checks. Something Marcus had discovered but never pursued because she was family. She ended up with minimal alimony and shared custody, moving into a small apartment in New Britain, working as a receptionist at a dental office, a far cry from her previous life. Robert was disbarred after the State Bar Association investigated his role in filing fraudulent documents. He had apparently done this before, for Harold helping him steal from business partners' estates, always counting on grieving families being too overwhelmed to fight back. Several previous cases were reopened, and Robert eventually faced criminal charges. His testimony against Harold, in exchange for a lighter sentence, revealed decades of financial crimes, money laundering, and estate fraud that made local news for months. For me, the legal victory felt hollow at first. I had won the right to keep my own life, my own home, but none of it brought Marcus back. The house felt emptier, knowing his family would never enter it again. Not that their presence had ever been welcome, but it was another connection to him severed. I spent weeks just existing, going through the motions of living without actually feeling alive. The life insurance money sat untouched in an account, feeling like blood money, even though I knew Marcus had wanted me protected. Slowly, with therapy and time, I began to rebuild. I adopted a golden retriever named Cooper, who filled the house with chaos and unconditional love. I returned to my design work, finding solace in creating beauty from blank spaces. Sarah visited monthly from Boston, becoming the sister I never had. My parents extended their stay, helping me sort through Marcus's belongings, keeping what held memories, donating what could help others. His gaming system went to a youth center, not to Jennifer's entitled child. I discovered Marcus had been funding a scholarship at his old high school, something he had never mentioned. I increased the funding and renamed it the Marcus Williams Memorial Scholarship for students pursuing technology and arts, combining our two passions. The first recipient was a young woman interested in digital design and coding, and seeing her excitement about her future helped me imagine my own future again. Marcus would have loved knowing his death had created opportunities for others. I started a blog about widows' rights and estate planning, sharing my story and the lessons learned. The response was overwhelming, hundreds of women writing about similar experiences with greedy in-laws, frozen accounts, and legal battles during their darkest moments. Catherine partnered with me to create a resource guide for protecting marital assets, and we held free seminars at libraries around Connecticut. Harold's spectacular downfall had made our case somewhat famous, serving as both a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope. The house became a gathering place for a different kind of family, the one we choose rather than the one we're born into. Sarah would stay in the guest room during her visits. My parents came for extended stays. My father finally fixing all the things Marcus had planned to get to someday. Marcus's true friends, the ones who had actually known and loved him rather than his family's money, became regular dinner guests. The studio hosted workshops for young designers, filling the space with creative energy and possibility. One day, almost a year after Marcus's death, I was cleaning out a closet and found a box of his childhood photos that Dorothy had somehow missed in her inventory. There was one of Marcus, at maybe age 7, building something with blocks, completely absorbed in his task, that same focused expression he had when coding. On the back, in a child's handwriting, he had written "My tower for my future family." Even as a child, he had been planning for a different future than the one his parents imagined, building something of his own design. I kept that photo on my desk, a reminder that Marcus had always been fighting for our life together, even before he knew me. His preparations, his precautions, his careful documentation hadn't been paranoid or morbid. They had been acts of love, ensuring that his chosen family, our family of 2, would survive, even if he couldn't. Every legal document, every recording, every letter had been a promise kept, a protection extended beyond death. The grief never fully goes away, but it transforms. The sharp edge of loss becomes a dull ache, always present, but no longer debilitating. I started dating again 2 years later, not looking for a replacement for Marcus, but open to new love. I sold some of my designs to a major company, achieving the professional success Marcus had always believed I would reach. The house remains our house in my heart, but it's also my house now, filled with new memories alongside the old ones. Harold tried to contact me once, 3 years after the court case, through a lawyer, since the restraining order was permanent. He wanted to buy Marcus's childhood belongings, offering substantial money for photo albums and school trophies. I sent back a one-word response: no. Dorothy sent a letter on what would have been Marcus's 40th birthday, asking if we could reconcile, if I could find forgiveness, claiming she had been influenced by Harold. I didn't respond. Some bridges are meant to stay burned. Some families are meant to stay fractured. The bittersweet truth I've learned is that grief and growth can coexist. The pain of losing Marcus will always be part of my story, but it's not the only part, or even the defining part anymore. The trauma his family inflicted in my darkest moment could have destroyed me, and there were days it nearly did. But Marcus had given me more than just legal protection. He had given me the knowledge that I was truly loved, completely chosen, and worth fighting for. His family's attempt to erase our marriage only proved how real and threatening it had been to their narrow view of the world. I think about the concept of blood family versus chosen family often now. Harold believed blood created an unbreakable bond, an automatic claim to loyalty and inheritance. But Marcus understood that family is built through daily choices, through respect and support, through seeing someone fully and choosing to stay. We had been each other's family in every way that mattered, and no amount of shared DNA with Harold could compete with the life we had consciously created together. The legal documents that saved me weren't just paperwork. They were love letters in legalese, Marcus saying I choose you even after I'm gone. Every account with my name, every beneficiary designation, every paragraph in his will was him fighting Harold from beyond the grave. He had known his family would come for me, would try to strip me of everything, and he had built a fortress of legal protection around the life we shared. His final act of love was ensuring I wouldn't lose everything twice. The money from the life insurance and the damages from Harold allowed me to do something Marcus and I had dreamed about, but never accomplished. I created a foundation for young artists and programmers from disadvantaged backgrounds, providing not just scholarships, but mentorship and internship opportunities. The first group of recipients included kids who reminded me of Marcus and myself. Creative minds who just needed someone to believe in their potential. Watching them succeed feels like Marcus's dreams continuing to ripple outward. I've become something of an expert on estate planning and widows' rights, frequently quoted in articles about protecting marital assets from hostile family members. The case of Williams versus Williams became a legal precedent in Connecticut for spousal rights and the validity of proper estate planning. Catherine tells me law students study our case, particularly the recordings, and how they demonstrated a pattern of intended fraud. Harold's spectacular fall from grace serves as a cautionary tale about greed and the limits of family privilege. People sometimes ask if I forgive Harold and Dorothy for what they tried to do. The answer is complex. I don't forgive them, but I also don't carry active hatred anymore. They're simply non-entities in my life. Characters in a cautionary tale I sometimes tell. Their actions revealed who they truly were. People who saw their son's death as a financial opportunity, who valued money over a widow's grief. That revelation freed me from any obligation to consider them family or honor their memory. The house has changed over the years. The studio expansion Marcus had sketched but never built now exists, filled with natural light and creative energy. The garden thrives with perennials that return each spring without fail, like promises kept. I host Thanksgiving now for my chosen family, the table full of friends who showed up during the darkness and stayed for the light. We toast to Marcus, to survival, to the families we create, rather than the ones we're assigned. Sometimes I dream about Marcus, not nightmares about the accident or the aftermath, but quiet dreams where we're doing mundane things like grocery shopping or painting the deck. In these dreams, he knows what happened after he died. And he's proud of how I fought, how I won, how I survived. He tells me he knew I would be strong enough. That's why he chose me, why he prepared so carefully. I wake from these dreams, peacefully feeling visited rather than haunted. I'm sharing this story because I know there are others out there facing similar battles, dealing with family members who see death as opportunity, who weaponize grief for gain. You need to know that you can fight back, that proper planning can protect you, that choosing your own family is valid and legal and binding. Create your will, designate your beneficiaries, document your wishes, and never assume that family means safety. Sometimes the people who share blood are the ones most likely to draw it. The title on Marcus's gravestone has been updated. Where it once read only his name and dates, according to Harold's design, it now includes beloved husband, chosen family, and protected in death as in life. I had the legal right to change it after winning the case, and Harold couldn't stop me from honouring Marcus properly. Fresh flowers appear there weekly, not just from me, but from the scholarship recipients, the foundation beneficiaries, and the people who knew Marcus as he truly was, rather than as Harold's son. Love transcends death in ways that blood never could. Marcus proved that with every document he signed, every precaution he took, every protection he put in place, his father believed that blood family would automatically inherit everything, that traditional claims would override legal documents, that intimidation would defeat love. He never expected what the official papers actually said. Never imagined that Marcus had chosen me so completely, so legally, so permanently, that not even death could break that choice. This is the greatest lesson from my journey through loss and legal battles. The family we choose is just as valid, just as legal, just as permanent as the one we're born into. Sometimes more so, because choice requires intention, commitment, and conscious love, rather than mere biological accident. Marcus chose me every day of our marriage and made sure that choice extended beyond his last breath. That's what real family does. They protect each other from all threats, even the ones that share their DNA. Harold once said blood is thicker than water, but he never knew the full quote. The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. The bonds we choose to create are stronger than the ones we're accidentally born into. Marcus understood this, lived it, and made sure it would remain true even after he was gone. His family by blood tried to erase our covenant, but paper trumped blood. Love trumped greed. And the family we chose to be survived everything they threw at us. To those watching who have faced similar battles or fear them in your future, know this: you are not alone. Your chosen family is valid, and with proper planning, love wins over blood every time. Document everything, create your legal protections, and never let anyone tell you that DNA matters more than daily choice. The family that matters is the one that shows up in your darkness, not the one that tries to profit from it. What questions do you have about protecting your own chosen family? Have you faced similar challenges with in-laws or blood relatives after loss? Share your stories in the comments below, because your experiences might help someone else fight their battle. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to hear more about triumph over family treachery. Share this with anyone who needs to know that widows can win, that preparation beats privilege, and that chosen family is real family. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the best revenge against those who try to steal from your grief is to survive, thrive, and tell the world exactly what they tried to do. May your chosen families always be protected, and may your love always outlive those who try to destroy it.